What's up, everybody? This is
Momo
with Fresh Out, and you're tuned into another episode of Prison Talk. If you haven't checked out our website, please do so at www.com. We got pre-workout, we got clothing, we got a lot of fly shit on there. If you got a question, hit us up at gmail.com. Also, subscribe and support our Instagram, our Twitter, and our Patreon, which are we love y'all. Thanks for supporting.
I love it so much.
What's up, everybody? This is RFI episode 76, I think. Wow, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our K-pop memorabilia or something. This week, we are going to be talking about the German thrash band Kreator, who most people nowadays know as just kind of like an old fogey band that's been sticking around for a while, but initially they were very important on developing our modern conception of black metal, death metal, thrash, grindcore, all kinds of stuff, very heavily influenced by a number of innovations made by these Dunkeljungen, as it were. For instance, consider this track, Storm of the Beast, off of their first album, Endless Pain. Already, that kind of rolling double bass is very innovative for the time period. And this spread out, very sparse, almost ambient style of riffing was obviously an influence on the Norwegian black metal stuff. You can see all those guys wearing Kreator shirts. As a matter of fact, mein Freund Varg Vikernes, Varja, might have been wearing a Pleasure to Kill Kreator shirt when he stabbed Euronymous, which is sort of deliciously ironic. And that kind of transition from sort of that ambient riff into a more thrashy one would be very influential on many of the bands around at the time period and later on, particularly those from Scandinavia seem to have picked up on this style quite a bit, particularly Ara Noir, who, despite their name, are from Norway. You can almost accuse this of being a rip-off. I tend to think of it more as a tribute, given that they take that initial Kreator riff and then push it into different and more progressive and evil directions, which makes sense because these dudes were also in Dødheimsgard and Vedbundsende, who are very progressive, rock-influenced, strange bands. But this was their thrash band, the Ara Noir guys. They were so influenced by Kreator, they in fact kind of copied how their lineup worked. See, initially, Kreator was more of just like a two-man band. You had Mille and Venter, who were the guitarist and drummer respectively, but they would trade off who did vocals on which track, and occasionally one of them would take over the other instruments. So sort of a strange collaboration type thing that lasted through the second Kreator album. Now the first one was highly influential on later black metal stuff. The second Kreator album, Pleasure to Kill, and the Flag of Hate EP immediately following it, which are usually combined on one disc, so I consider them to be a single entity, given the close proximity of their release dates. These albums were heavily influential on death metal, as we shall hear. So we have heavy use of tremolo riffs, relying on drone notes, almost as sort of a pedal tone, which, if I were to just utter that sentence in isolation without Kreator playing under it, you might think I was talking about Morbid Angel. And in fact, I would say that Pleasure to Kill might have been the largest influence on Morbid Angel's first album, Altars of Madness. In fact, Pleasure to Kill, an argument could be made that it's more of a death metal album than a thrash metal album. And if it is a death metal album, then it is one of the first of its kind. So how did this turn out once it got chewed up and spit out by a slightly more intellectual gang of Dunkeljungen from Florida? A little bit like that. Very obvious Kreator influence here with the usage of drone notes, tremolo picking, the very insistent and dogmatic drumming. But those wacky solos are very much a Morbid Angel innovation that didn't really exist before them, and to be honest, hasn't really been successfully imitated since, if you were to ask me. I think Trey Azagthoth is a lead guitar genius. But not only did we get influence on very fast, blasty death metal type stuff from Kreator's Pleasure to Kill album, they also pioneered the concept of stacking up a lot of different mid-paced to faster-paced, thrashy, breakdowny type riffs in sequence to give their songs a bit of a complexity that might be lacking in other early death metal bands. This one is from a, I want to say about 8-minute long song off of that EP I was talking about. This one's called Twilight of the God. No, Awakening of the Gods. Duh, I thought I was talking about Halloween for a second. But here we go. That's the thrash metal part, guys. So we're gonna have a whole bunch of fucking riffs coming at you. Noted metal luminary and scholar Ultraboros probably has a massive boner when he listens to this part. If you know who Ultraboros is, you're a cool dude. I like how they utilize those chromatic notes there, just like notes that are only a fret away from each other, played in an almost nonsensical sequence that is then sorted out by the song's logic to give us a very dark vision of what music could sound like. It's very much a staircase style riff. This sample's going to be a bit longer because I want to get to this one really sick riff that happens towards the end of it. So apologies in advance if you are allergic to thrash metal riffs and structural complexity. Sorry, not sorry. Here it comes, here it comes! Yeah! That, of course, is in fact Das Good Scheiße. And apparently a lot of later bands, well into the 90s, thought so as well, as evidenced by Suffocation doing a very similar thing and just taking it to new levels of complexity and tempo variation. Hopefully everybody out here listens to Suffocation. I mean, you got it, right? They basically invented the brutal death metal breakdown, which we are about to hear as it evolves out of this creator thrash influence madness.
How neat is that?
So like I said, a lot of bands picked up on what Kreator was doing and took it in much more complex directions, as evidenced by Mr. Mike Smith's considerably more technically complex drumming. And of course, more wacky, weirdo solos. After Pleasure to Kill, Kreator went in a slightly more conventional and yet substantially more melodic and complex phase with their next 3 albums, which were entitled Terrible Certainty, Extreme Aggression, and Coma of Souls. These albums, I think, were more of an influence on more melodic style death metal bands. For instance, check out this part from the title track on Terrible Certainty. This song's interesting because it makes a very melodic riff out of ingredients that wouldn't normally be considered that melodic or consonant. And if you were to ask me, which you're kind of doing by listening to this riff in particular was heavily influential on a lot of the later Swedish melodic death metal stuff, particularly bands that edged more towards thrash like At the Gates. That particular flourish you just heard, very Kreator. In fact, very much influenced by that particular riff off of Terrible Certainty, to the point where I think they might have been jamming on that song when they wrote this song, which is of course entitled Suicide Nation. Another pretty cool track off of Terrible Certainty is Toxic Trace. This one's cool because it bridges the droning tremolo style of early Kreator with their later more melodic stuff, and also those chromatic jumbled up riffs that I was talking about earlier. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in this track, and the way they combined so many different styles of guitar playing into a single riff was heavily influential on later bands who wanted to take metal in more complex and extreme directions. If you don't like this song, you are a homosex. That's my hardcore analysis of it. Very good song. Pretty essential early thrash metal stuff. Well, not that early. I think this album came out like 87. But you can hear that sort of style where you have a lot of different guitar techniques being mushed into one riff and played in sequence on later Immortal stuff when they went in a more thrashy vein. This is off of the first track on At the Heart of Winter entitled Withstand the Fall of Time. And you can see them using those Creator palm mutes, a bit of chromatic style stuff in the little linking parts like that. And also a heavy incorporation of melody, as we are about to find out, but still very thrashy. So many people consider those last three Immortal albums before they broke up initially to be their German thrash tribute, and I agree with them. Once we finally get around to Coma of Skulls, oh god, what is it? That's like a nasty vodka coma. Coma of Souls, the last Creator album of note. They were doing a lot of stuff with acoustic guitars, melodic intros, outros, and segues, and switching from very death metal-y stuff into more minor and even major key melodicism, which was a heavy influence on melodic death metal of the same time period. For instance, the vocals are a little bit more understandable on this particular album as well, which is unfortunate because the lyrics are fairly generic speed metal type shit about environmentalism or whatever the fuck. So now we have very insistent tremolo riffs being backed up by this sparkling melodic lead guitar, courtesy of Frank Gosdick from Sodom, who joined the band for this album. And there is that turnaround to more major key stuff. That sort of transition would be very, very influential on later, more melodic and epic death metal bands, such as the following track from Therion. So that sort of sliding melody shows the hallmarks of Creator's Coma of Souls and Extreme Aggression albums for sure. But now we're going to get into a transition that is very Coma of Souls-esque. But as has become a recurring theme, Therion took it in a more complex direction, which means the transition isn't going to hit you in the face as suddenly. It's a much more drawn-out, heavily foreshadowed affair, utilizing this clean guitar over hanging, buzzing Swedish death metal chords. And a very beautiful lead guitar line, if I do say so myself. And that little arpeggio run there is almost note for note that Coma of Souls solo. Coincidence? Or perhaps something more. I'm not sure, but what I will tell you is that I don't think Creator gets enough credit for how influential they were on later stuff, but at the same time I can kind of understand why. Nowadays, they're essentially the same as like Gravedigger or Running Wild. They're essentially a band that is resting upon their laurels and playing stuff from the 80s. Also, even as they dabbled into death metal and melodic death metal and black metal, Creator were always a speed metal band at heart, which means that their philosophy was less complex than what was put forward by the death metal and black metal that followed. I won't say that it was initially liberal, but it's more of the speed metal thing where you notice that something is wrong in the world. You have a general feeling that society is going down a bad path, but you are still hooked into the matrix too much, and you can't really think outside of the box how to get around it. Luckily, black metal was there to do that for us in a philosophical and musical structural sense. As for everything Creator put out after Coma of Souls,
It stinks!
아, 회의해야 되는데 쟁댕이 또 어디 갔어? 또 딸기 먹으러 갔지? 못해 먹겠네!
well, that about does it for RFI this week, folks. Hopefully everybody had a good time listening. Be sure to tune in next week. We're probably gonna talk about some other band. Maybe a really obscure one. Maybe a more known one like we did with this week. Hopefully you'll learn some new stuff. If you see Kyle, he's about this high, be sure to say hello. His mom's been worried sick. We haven't seen that guy in a while, so putting the word out there. Hopefully somebody sees Kyle. I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye!
I used to want to kill all of these people. I wanted to round up every earnest college girl and every long-haired thief and every hand-clapping hymn singer who had demonstrated for black rule in Rhodesia, or for a boycott of South Africa, or for black voting rights in the South, or what have you. Make them dig an enormous burial pit and then machine gun all of them. I wanted to obtain all of the old membership lists of the organizations to which these people had belonged, so that they could all be rounded up and done away with. They have done so much damage in this world, and then walked away from it without the least regard for what they've done, without the least understanding of the harm they've caused, that it seemed to me that the proper thing to do was just kill them all.